We'd always open up a map and close our eyes, and wherever our finger landed, we would go apple picking there. So it was kind of a randomness to it. And one year, our finger landed on this tiny little town called Sharon Springs, New York. It's about 3.5 hour drive from the city. We drove up there, went apple picking, and on the way out of town, saw this farmhouse. And so on the drive back to the city, we both decided in our naivete, being 30-year-old, hot shot professionals in New York City, that we needed this farmhouse. Yeah. And so by the time we got back to the city, we had decided we were going to cash in everything that we had ever saved up to that point in our career. We were going to take out $1 million mortgage, and we were going to buy this farmhouse, which we were going to use on the weekends. That's how obnoxious we were. And
welcome back to another episode of Demystifying Cosmetics. What does it actually mean to build a skincare brand on clinical science and kindness? Today, I'm joined by Dr. Brent Ridge, a physician, public health graduate, MBA, and co-founder of Beekman 1802, and also the chairman of kindness.org. In an industry built on aspiration, storytelling, and increasingly bold efficacy claims, very few founders come to the table with a clinical lens, but today's guest does. So welcome to the show, Dr. Brent Ridge.
Oh, it's great to be here. I've been waiting forever to get on this show.
And I'm sorry that the invite came so late. I think I was intimidated by, what I think a lot of people would view as your brand, Beekman 1802, being, the success story for an indie brand, blowing up, right? So talk to me a little bit. Let's do a little background for those that maybe don't know, a little bit about how Beekman 1802 started, and kind of how you've integrated kindness in just briefly what are the central themes that make your brand individually yours?
Sure. Well, I think the central theme is that we never thought we were going to be a beauty brand.
Yeah.
And my background was in medicine, longevity and aging, and I was at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City, and my husband and co-founder of Beekman worked in advertising. And I had left clinical medicine to go work at Martha Stewart's company when they were trying to create a new division devoted to health and wellness. And so I was heading that new build out. And one weekend in 2006, Josh and I were driving in upstate New York. We always had this habit of going apple picking someplace in upstate New York in the fall, very in our Ralph Lauren plaid.
Oh, exactly. Very romantic and quintessential.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. And we'd always open up a map and close our eyes, and wherever our finger landed, we would go apple picking there. So it was kind of a randomness to it. And one year, our finger landed on this tiny little town called Sharon Springs, New York. It's about 3.5 hour drive from the city. We drove up there, went apple picking, and on the way out of town, saw this farmhouse with a for sale sign in the yard. And it was just it was like a Disney version of a farmhouse, like it was just perfection. It was built by a man named William Beekman in the year 1802, which is how the company got. And so on the drive back to the city, we both decided in our naivete, being 30-year-old, hot shot professionals in New York City, that we needed this farmhouse. Yeah. And so by the time we got back to the city, we had decided we were going to cash in everything that we had ever saved up to that point in our career. We were going to take out $1 million mortgage, and we were going to buy this farmhouse, which we were going to use on the weekends. That's how obnoxious we were. And, this Sharon Springs being such a tiny town, after we did purchase the farm, everybody knew, these two gay guys from New York City bought this 200-year-old farm. And one weekend we came up, and there was a note in our mailbox from a local farmer, and he was losing his farm, and he had a herd of 100 goats, and his note said, "Could I please bring my animals to your property to graze? Otherwise, I'll have to sell my herd." And we met with him, and we saw how much he loved these animals. And we said, come, bring them. You can use the barn. There was another little cottage on the property. You can live there. Yeah. It actually worked out great for us because we we're only there
Sure.
periodically, that you could, keep an eye on things. And we say that was the original act of kindness that started Beekman,
Yeah.
because a year and a half later, when the recession hit,
Yes.
my nascent division at Martha folded because the media industry was so impacted. Josh's advertising agency, where he was a partner, folded,
Yeah.
and we had this kind of oh crap moment.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? And so we went to the farm, and basically after 6 months of depression, we Googled what can we make with goat milk. And that's how Beekman 1802 really got started. We saw goat milk soap was on the list of things that we could make with goat milk. And so we just started making goat milk bars of soap, not thinking it was going to become what it is, just thinking, how are we going to pay the mortgage on the farm?
Yeah. And might I take a moment to age myself, where your story reminded me a lot of that movie Baby Boom? Do you remember that with Diane Keaton?
I think we're the same age plane.
Where she moves to a farmhouse and she makes good on her situation, and
she made apples.
She did,
yes.
But I was listening to it and I said, I think there's a movie out there.
Maybe there's a movie in our future.
Exactly. Everything is secular, so this could be the remake.
We'll call it Goat Boom.
Exactly.
Goat.
But
that's how it started.
That's incredible. And the goat milk theme. So it's funny because I worked for a contract manufacturer probably in it was post 2009, because my son was very young at the time, and it was called Canis. Do you remember Canis goat milk?
Canada. Yeah, great. Yeah.
And so it was kind of that iceberg, right? Of like, oh, there's goat milk, and what does it do? And so the brand positions goat milk as containing 31 nutrients, which are functionally meaningful. Kind of how did you make that connection, and what are you finding in terms of the benefits that goat milk can provide for topical skincare?
Mm-hmm. Well, when we first started making the bars of soap, and again, that was just going to be our business, the bars of soap. And we got our first major retail partner in anthropology, and that gave us enough scale that we were starting to get anecdotal feedback, from the customers who were using the bars of soap, and saying that particularly people who had sensitive skin, I think they've always gravitated toward more of a natural soap product anyway, and maybe even more so goat milk products, as you probably saw at Canis. And so that just kind of piqued my curiosity about goat milk in general, and why it had been used for so many hundreds of years to treat people with sensitive skin, like people would bathe in the goat milk. And so I just started researching it and looking at our bar of soap that we were formulating, and realized that not only did goat milk have the same pH as your skin, but in the bar of soap that was the result of our process, it also had a similar pH to the skin barrier. So by cleansing with it, these people who already had reactive skin in some way, it just helped their skin, rather than cleansing with something that was more disruptive to the barrier.
Yeah.
And so that's really how we started. And our first positioning around the bar of soap was we were soap for sensitive people, not only because of the pH, but because of the kindness aspect of our company. And then as we just continued to grow, and we became more interested in looking at the microbiome of the skin. And what had always fascinated me about the research coming out around the skin microbiome, which with your great conversation with Dr. Larry Weiss the other day, also revealed there's still so much to learn.
Yeah.
And so everything is so hypothetical. But what we were so interested in looking at were how the oligosaccharides in goat milk might serve as a prebiotic to the microbial ecosystem on the surface of the skin.
Yeah.
And so that's really how we started developing our moisturizing products. We're really looking at how these ingredients in goat milk might impact the microbiome of the skin. And then we just continue to look at all those mechanisms of action as the study of the microbiome becomes more fruitful. And then always just continuing to look at science and what is coming out of goat milk that can be potentially used in different ways. And our most recent innovation came in the form of extracting the goat milk exosomes. And that came from a study that I was reading about 3 years ago looking at novel ways to administer chemotherapy. So what they were looking at was how they could infuse these chemotherapeutic drugs into exosomes so that they could do more targeted delivery in the body.
Sure.
And once they discovered that they could use these exosomes for this targeted delivery, then they just started to try to look for places in nature where exosomes could be easily extractable in large quantities. And they happened to find them in goat milk. And so that's how we started with our kind of better aging research and looking at the exosomes and how they might be used to deliver ingredients into the skin in a better way.
And just to take a step back for those listening, when you talk about the bar soap and the pH bar soap, in order to actually make it right, you need to go through a saponification process, which requires generally sodium hydroxide. And so, bar soaps are notoriously a very high pH. So this was kind of this new way that you guys were trying to approach it. And then, when you talk about goat milk, and I'm curious to understand if also what the goats eat and they're exposed to changes the chemical composition of the, not necessarily, wide shifts in what you can find, but maybe the ratio of certain proteins and the profile of it.
Yeah, I mean, not so much. I mean, maybe in small quantities, but because the way as we've grown our company, the way we have to aggregate goat milk from many different sources, we work with a consortium of 24 different farms around the United States that brings all the goat milk together, and then it is hydrolyzed so that we can formulate more specifically with it. So it's really hard to look at the varying levels from each different farm because it's all coming in collectively.
Yeah.
But after we identified what we thought were the 31 kind of key components of the goat milk, all the vitamins, all the minerals, etc., then we just started looking at how we can amplify those nutrients in a different way for different functions. So whether it's the exosomes, whether it's the oligosaccharides, whether it's lactoferrin, that's kind of how we think about new product innovation.
Nice. And, going back a little bit to kind of the skin barrier and the microbiome and how that might be ties into claims in the broader industry, how have you positioned Beekman to think about clinically tested claims and where have you seen maybe that area where you've had to say this is maybe a little bit too much to overspend on right now on this clinical testing?
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, that's always an issue because you have to have your budget for clinical testing and your budget for marketing. And sometimes you hope that they overlap in a good way, but a lot of times in fields that are in their infancy, like the study of the microbiome, you can spend a lot of money and still not make something that is a motivator for the consumer. And so, what we look at with most of our products now, which I think is kind of at the edge of where the consumer meets where the science is actually at, is looking at, are we not disturbing the microbiome in any way? Mm-hmm. Because as you know, so many of the active ingredients, particularly the exfoliants and the acids and the cleansers, that is kind of their primary damage to the barrier is what it's doing to the barrier in the microbiome. And so we really look at how we can not disturb the microbiome in any product that we create.
Yeah.
And so that's the beginning point. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
That did, yes. And I think, this comes up because I've met with a variety of founders, right, who want to go all in and we're talking, 6 figures to study endpoints in the microbiome, which may be exactly right, are not relevant to the consumer. What do they care about? What does it mean even for an outcome when you increase diversity? Are you demonstrating anything else? To others who just are really like, it doesn't matter, consumers don't care. But I think there is a fine line, and I wanted to talk about it with you just because I feel as if Beekman has done a really good job of kind of, saying that there are, some truths that then can insinuate performance, but then also validation without breaking the bank, right? Without saying like, we've made no money because we've invested it all back into.
That's right. And, I think for us, obviously the consumer wants to know that there is some science behind your product, but they're not necessarily interested in learning all of the science. I think the benefit that we had early on was that we were growing our brand partially on TV retail. QVC, and they are so stringent with the claims that you can make because of they're governed by the FTC. And so we have been a very clinically oriented brand from the very beginning because we had to do all those clinical tests to prove out to the satisfaction of their legal team before we could make any on-air commentary. And so we've always been very specific about what we can say, why we're saying it, how we can make the consumer understand what we're trying to say. Whereas, as you know, in today's kind of rogue social media ecosystem around beauty, that's not the case if you're talking about a product on TikTok or Instagram. But that's a discipline that we had in our company very early on.
Okay, real quick. Raise your hand if you have dealt with active instability. If you have ever opened a jar of retinol cream and smelt an off odor, or noticed your formula went dark brown, chances are you are dealing with active instability. It's never fun when the formula you've been working on goes south and the due date is only days away. That's why we've encapsulated the trickier ingredients to work with so you can kick the stability struggle to the curb. From retinol to vitamin C, we make it easier to work with those ingredients that typically give you that 3 p.m. headache. The cellulose shell shields the active from outside exposure. Things like air and light that are likely to cause active breakdown, giving you the power to create stable and effective formulas without the trial and error. Ready to quickly create effective skincare formulas? Discover Tagra's Cellucaps line by going to tagra.com/cellucaps. So, have you encapsulated yet? Now back to the show.
And there has been a rise, I guess. Well, I don't know if it's a rise of just, it's probably been around for a while, but I think there's been a little bit more focus or acceptance of using animal byproducts. And so, there's an increase in use of colostrum or lactose and milk proteins, these sometimes biologically complex ingredients. What were some of the challenges that you found in formulating with something as complex as a hydrolyzed goat milk?
Yes. Oh, this is a good question because we are actually coming out with a really amazing innovation next year that we've been working on for the past several years. But one of the issues that was always problematic for us is that there was kind of a threshold of the amount of goat milk that we could use in any particular formulation because at a certain level, then there became a noticeable odor to the product.
Yeah.
And so that always, of course, you always have to think about consumer experience.
Yeah.
And no matter how well it's working, if they don't like the experience, they're going to keep using it. And so that always had this kind of artificial cap on the amount of benefit that we could get from the use of the goat milk. And so now there's this new technology that we're using with enzymatic cleavage, which can cleave certain of the amino acid chains in a certain way so that we limit that odor issue. So now we're going to be able to formulate with even higher concentrations of the goat milk in every product, which is something, that science did not exist, but yeah, it's always an issue when you're dealing with a natural product like that. And also resource, how you're going to source the natural product. The consortium that we use of these American farms for our goat milk, every farm has to be certified as a humane by the Humane Society for the way they treat their animals. So you just have to be very mindful of all of those things. And it's no different from any other natural product. And is it sustainably harvested? What are the agricultural workers, treated like? These are all issues you have to consider when you're using a natural source.
For sure. And I'm sure there's also a lot of heat intolerance that you experience because of denaturing, as well as incompatibilities and, having to do additives for even color change, right?
That's right.
That have made
that's always
that have made it very challenging to incorporate. So, a main theme that you've highlighted and the brand focuses on is kindness as strategy and not just storytelling. And I'd love to hear from you, this built on goat milk and kindness. So, the origins of kindness incorporating into, how this formed, but moving forward and as you grow, how do you operationalize kindness inside a company?
Uh-huh. Well, the idea of the kindness goes all the way back to that original moment of kindness with Farmer John and bringing the goats onto the farm and, the help of our neighbors in this little agricultural community. We still have all of our customers' neighbors. But I have always felt from my time working in clinical medicine that the way you treat yourself and talk to yourself, the way you interact with other human
Yeah.
beings, is a wellness practice.
Yeah.
And so we always talk about the science of kindness because one of the research projects I was working on right after medical school, I was at Harvard doing this research fellowship in genetics of aging. And we were looking for any type of genetic component that could contribute to extreme longevity. We're doing all of these, blood tests and whatnot, trying to find this tiny little piece of DNA that might make the difference. And and I left that study before it was concluded. But ultimately, the conclusion of that study was that there really was no little piece of DNA that contributes to this. The most important factor to how well you're going to age. So the most important factor in longevity is optimism and the number of your social interactions as you get older. And so for me, kindness is a preventative measure. And I always tell people, and how we explain it to the consumer, is that whenever you give an act of kindness or someone bestows a random act of kindness on you, you kind of get that glowy feeling on the inside. And that glowy feeling comes from this surge of neurohormones like the serotonin, the dopamine, surging in your body, the oxytocin, and a concomitant reduction in the amount of cortisol. Well, all of these things that are causing this mental feeling that you're having are also impacting the microbiome of the skin.
Yeah.
And so, we talk about the gut and skin and brain microbiome axis. This idea of kindness and how you are putting that out in the world and how are you receiving it, I think is as impactful for the health of your skin and the health of your total body as anything that we are formulating in the actual jar. And so when you look at our ingredient list, you will always see kindness listed as an ingredient because we think it's critically important in, our brand.
Yeah. And this is probably not totally related to cosmetics, but in thinking about that, and kindness and optimism are two very different things, right? You can have more of one than the other. When we start to think about current events and kind of today's atmosphere, how are you thinking about remaining optimistic and ways that people can think about kindness and optimism, interconnected, and how they can spread that?
Mm-hmm. Well, we try never to be polarizing,
Yep.
even though I think people understand where we fall on the spectrum.
Yeah.
But I think what we try to educate people is that at the root of kindness is this idea of empathy and understanding different perspectives and putting yourself in someone else's shoes and seeing how they are viewing the world. And from that standpoint, figuring out how to communicate with them. And so we always say kindness is not something easy. Kindness is hard work. It's just like any type of preventative health practice, whether you're, eating the right diet. Sometimes you want pizza when you should have the salad, or, you don't want to get up and do your exercise, but you do it. The same thing with kindness. It takes work. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to be kind. Like you have to work at it. And so that's how we approach it in this modern world where things are so contentious and so polarizing, is we just say, hey, we want kindness for everybody. And we want the health benefits of kindness for everybody. Yeah.
Awesome. And, shaping that into, I think, skincare, where do you think with consumers trust gets built and lost?
I think we get asked this a lot because we are a business who's been around for 16 years. And I think people would probably say we are a very authentic brand. And I know that word is, maybe degraded these days. But, people often ask, well, what is the measurement of authenticity? And I say that there's only one true measurement of authenticity, and that is longevity.
Yeah.
Like, anybody can turn on and be authentic for a 30-second video,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But can you continue to be that day after day, year after year after year? And most people can't. And I think that's how we have built trust. And I think people, when they think about Beekman, they always think, okay, well, Beekman, yes, have far evolved from when we were making bars of soap at our dining room table. But they truly do feel and truly believe that all of the research that we do in the skincare and even in the science of kindness, that it is to make their life better. And so they know that we're not going to put anything out there that doesn't somehow make their life better.
Yeah. So there is a consistency to your core value that really dictates every action, whether it be messaging to product development to business decisions, and
absolutely.
And that
from
consistency.
a product development standpoint, we, as I said, we always start out with, is this product kind to the skin? So is it going to damage the barriers? Is it going to alter the microbiome in any way? That's kind of the first layer in the product development. But we also look at every marketing message. Is it going to put kindness out into the world? Is it going to make people feel better about themselves? And even if you look at our ambassador program, which we call the Kindness Crew, it's about 4,000 people on social media, and they get screened in a very specific way. We had worked with kindness.org before I became chairman to help fund this research in something called the Kindness Quotient, which is the first scientifically validated measurement of kindness within ecosystems.
Okay.
And so now every ambassador that comes into our program has to take the Kindness Quotient, so we see where they're falling. And we do a very thorough analysis, not only of the content that they're producing, but looking at the comments in their TikTok post, in their Instagram post, to see if the communities that they have cultivated also have an element of kindness. And our ambassadors are obviously rewarded for product sales if they're given an affiliate link or things like that, but they are also incentivized to post messages about kindness that have nothing to do with product. And so we really hope that our community is spreading kindness in this kind of ecosystem of social media.
That's awesome. And, I've had a few guests on that have a similar, I think, outlook as you do, to kind of always be curious and having, looking at the positive. And I really appreciate that, especially I think in an emerging kind of atmosphere of challenging, a lot of challenging the norm, which, is all well and good, except for how you do that approach. Is it out of curiosity, or is it to, feel self-validation? And so that has been, kind of a trend that is a little scary to me in terms of, science influencers who I don't normally or necessarily feel like I'm learning as much as I am fearful.
Yes. Well, and hasn't that been the case of the beauty industry for a long time?
For sure.
Right. I mean, that's how how it became the beauty industry.
Yeah. And, leaning into that a little bit, what are some of the signals that tells you, a brand is, kind of in line with your approach, or even this idea of transparency and vagueness and authenticity? What are some signals that you look for in a brand that you're interested in or want to invest your consumer money into?
Oh, this on a personal level.
Yeah.
It's so funny that you asked that, because I'm not a big consumer product. I use our product, and then most of the other consumer goods I buy are generally not mass-produced product. It's more, small batch type things. And so maybe I think my personal approach is that big industry is somehow malignant in some way. And so my personal belief is try to go smaller as much as possible. Yeah, so maybe that's just how I read it, but that might just be my personal background.
Yeah. And to close this out, you are the chairman of kindness.org. And so tell us a little bit about the organization and areas that others can potentially help out or lean in.
Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah, so kindness.org was founded by a fantastic woman, Jacqueline Lindsay. We're getting ready to celebrate our 10th anniversary. I've been on the board for just under 2 years and just accepted the chairman role for the board this year. Their philosophy has always been that there is a science to kindness that needs to be studied. And so they have researchers from Oxford and Harvard, kind of behavioral psychology researchers who really look at how kindness shows up in different organizations. And so, with the KQ, the Kindness Quotient, they are able to look at things as diverse as corporate culture, online communities, school systems, and then analyze what's going on in each of those different subsets. So really fascinating research. And they kind of have two arms. One is working in the school systems with a program called Learn Kind. There's a whole free curriculum that any teacher can download and use. And then working in corporate cultures where they can help HR systems really implement programs that make employees feel like they are more needed and more respected in their cultures.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like this should be integrated into maybe a little bit of the cosmetic science curriculum that we can approaches, and especially when you're learning about claims language, right?
Yeah. Well, right. And being transparent, because, I do think everybody in our industry gets sucked into making more outrageous claims.
For sure.
Because you have 3 seconds to capture someone's attention.
Yeah.
And as a cosmetic chemist, you are, I think you are kind of at the base level, like saying, here's what it is. And then it's probably sometimes odd or shocking to see where your information goes, right? And how it's headlined.
Yes.
And I do think, and I do think, sorry, you go ahead.
Well, it also, as a whole, as their industry, right, we're always kind of preaching like better, right? Like you'll look better. And so there is that, an element of there's something wrong with you now. So not having the kindness of, and I think we've gotten better at a lot of kind of embracing and, self-esteem and encompassing a lot of different types of individuals and bodies. But I still think the underlying theme is kind of what's, we need people to purchase. And how do we do that? Well, something's wrong with you, right?
Well, that's how you get the conversion.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what's going to be the thing that makes them click the button? And I think, for me as a physician and always knowing the importance of preventative health, right? And these are things that you have to do for the long term in order to get the benefits. I think that's how we approach it. And I think our consumer thinks when they come into the brand, I am with this brand for the rest of my life. Like we have really high LTV on our customer base. Because I think the people who find us understand that that's the approach that we take. These are not about immediate fixes. These are about things to make your skin healthier over the entire course of your lifetime.
And LTV, lifetime value, correct?
Lifetime value, yeah.
Got it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming on today and talking a little bit about everything, but really, I think that end section really tied it together in terms of kind of how you've positioned kindness in Beekman, but also what it means to have, a trusted community, and how you can incorporate skincare into that without the aspects of negativity and change. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Jen. I appreciate the chat.